Okay.
Good morning. I'm just waiting for people to gather and join our webinar this morning. This is Claire Berry, and I will be the moderator of this morning's program. And I'm so delighted that today we are speaking with the great artist, Linda Ridgway from Dallas. I'm just giving you all a couple of minutes to join, and then we'll get started just at 11. This is the first webinar that Linda and I have done. Normally, ArtistEye would be in the galleries. And so this is a little bit of an experiment for both of us. But there are some advantages. We'll be able to see more of Linda's work intermixed with works from the Kimbell that she'll be discussing. So I'm really looking forward to that. Linda's prepared a wonderful PowerPoint of images that we're going to be walking through today. So it's now 11. And again, welcome to this morning's ArtistEye at the Kimbell Art Museum with artist Linda Ridgway from Dallas, and I'm the moderator, Claire Berry, Director of Conservation at the Kimbell. I want to start this morning's program by giving you a few pointers on how to participate in today's program. Please use the Zoom Q&A feature to ask any questions throughout the program, and we'll try to address those questions towards the end of the talk. And just a reminder that your microphones will be muted. And please, Linda, I would love for you to do most of the talking, but I'll just get it started. We're starting with a beautiful installation photograph of an installation of Linda's work in different media. The Evening Line installation, where we see some of her very delicate work in cast bronze and her very special prints and drawings dealing with fabrics and textiles. This gives us a nice overview of some of the work that we'll be talking about this morning. And Linda, maybe I'll hand it over to you to pick up, and this will be very casual back and forth conversation today.
All right. As you stated, this is my first Zoom I've ever done, and I wish to thank Tally Dunn and Trini Martinez and Teresa Rafiti for helping me get this together to present to you today, Claire. And thank you for taking your time to do this. So, yes, this is
delighted. I'm a big fan of your work, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation this morning.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. This is an installation that I put together with the Tally Dunn Gallery in January, right before all this started, you know. And this had some new work that had never been shown. And one piece that was from an older group, but I felt like it fit the composite of sculpture and drawings that I wanted to present, and that is the Alice Chronicle in the center. But maybe we should just move on to the next piece. And oh, great, this is wonderful. It has the titles. I was worried I would forget the titles. Thank you, Teresa. This is a piece that I basically, it's kind of a new piece. It is a new piece, but I had basically simplified it. Some of my newest work is becoming, I would think, more simple. There's a whole sense of this organic love of nature that I find just so important to me. And the title comes from a poem by Robert Frost. Frost.
Yes, I know Robert Frost is a huge influence in your work. Definitely. And I wanted to ask you a question, because when I look at your cast bronze pieces, they're so delicate. You know, you're dealing with a subject like a leaf, and we all know how thin that is, and all the delicate veins and so on in a leaf structure. And yet you're using cast bronze. When I think of bronze, I think of a material that's solid, firm, very lasting. What was it that drew you initially to working with bronze? Because you did start out as a printmaker. And what attracted you to this medium? And then I'd love to also hear more about your relationship with Harry Geffert. And I know you were partners, worked together for many years. And that's part of your story as well.
It is a big part of my story. Yes, well, the whole emphasis of the nature comes from my childhood, living out in the country and different things like that. And my grandmother was my main emphasis of that. And my mother was the person who brought poetry into my life and would read Robert Frost to me. She loved Robert Frost. And years later, I found a book at a local bookstore called A Boy's Will, which was his first, first volume of poetry. And it was so great because all of a sudden I was reading, I bought it, I took it home, I started reading all these poems. And I realized that a lot of times my titles for my artwork was coming right out of the poetry that I hadn't heard since a child. And so, in other words, it had made such an imprint on my mind to incorporate these thoughts about nature. Of course, Frost, some people I think he's, not as complicated or whatever, but I find his work so wonderfully organic and fluid and it's so visual. That's what. So I've used it. If you go to the next slide, there's a close-up of the leaf, and
Sorry.
there, I think there is what you were talking about, the thin lines and all the delicate qualities. This is the first group of pieces that I have cast outside of not working with Harry Geffert. And this is with Ken King, who basically has a foundry in Houston, and he was an assistant to Harry for many years. And it's wonderful to find someone who has the same artistry as Harry had and the same interest in dealing with the delicate things that I wanted to do as a sculptor. You had asked who influenced me. Barbara Hepworth was one of them, but also I think Giacometti. I saw a show of his in DC early on in the 80s, and it was at the Hirshhorn, and I've never seen such a I've only, and sometimes you go to a museum, you see one piece, and it doesn't really give you the whole story of that artist. This was a huge show of his, and I just fell in love with it. I fell in love with the idea of it being delicate. And when I finally met Harry and started working with him, he was the only person that really understood that I was wanting to say something different. It's not that I didn't admire the other artists who did the massive, like the Henry Moores and different things in bronze. I really wanted something that was more fluid, organic, linear drawing. As a printmaker, texture, line quality, delicacies were all the things that I was looking for.
Yes.
And this leaf, by the way, is a large leaf. It's not a tiny leaf. It's about 14 inches. It's a big leaf. And I sculpted a kind of long line for it to suspend from. And very simple, but I think it almost looks like fabric in a way too.
It is, and I think that's a very interesting point you make. And we'll be looking at some of your fabric pieces shortly. And as I just want to remind our followers that part of the program today will be that Linda will speak directly about works of art in the Kimbell collection. And she's chosen a very interesting group of works to talk about. And so they will come a little later in the program. So we're looking a little bit more closely at her own work here in the beginning. And then I'm fascinated to hear what she will say about the works that she selected from the Kimbell. Obviously, we don't have a Giacometti. We wish we did, but you've chosen some very interesting works. Shall we advance to the next image?
Let's please do.
Okay.
A story and the poet. I feel like, in a way, this relates quite well to the Barbara Hepworth that we're going to see in a minute. Let's go to the close-up of this. This is a bronze piece as well. And it is a branch that, unlike Hepworth, who used, modeling and building armatures and plaster, and then did mold making, I do what is called direct casting, which is something that Harry helped me in so many ways to try to do something as delicate, because I wanted to say that I wanted it to be like a drawing. Sometimes I felt like my work was like charcoal drawings, even though they were bronze. If we want, this piece right here almost has the eye of what I call the Hepworth piece. Let's go to the Hepworth piece. It's at the museum. I love it.
This is fabulous. This is the first work from the Kimbell collection that you'll be discussing today, and it was a gift from Ruth Carter Stevenson, I might add. Very happy to have it.
It is beautiful. It's a beautiful piece. It's so organic. It's so moving, and I think the thing that drew me to it was the texture. And when I first saw it at the museum last March, I think it was, that you and I met, it was, I really enjoyed the patina that was on it, as well as all of the textural qualities, of which you could see that where she had placed the plaster onto the metal structures. And that's how she did this. She would have a metal form built and then do the plaster over that. And then they would do a mold at the foundry, and then a wax, and then it was poured, and then it was all put back together. Very complicated process, but yet at this piece, it's the movement and the grace. And, Hepworth loved to dance. I'm reading this book right now that is it's called The Sculptor in the Studio. I don't know if you can see that. Can you see that? No, probably not. Anyhow, the book is it's wonderful, because I'm in the process of trying to rebuild a studio space since Harry passed, and I'm moving, my sculptures areas to Dallas. It is interesting to see her, what she was doing to build her studio space, and how she kept adding on sections of it. But getting back to the sculpture, she was one of the first to do what we call that center pierced quality. She did it in her stonework. And here again, you have it in this bronze piece, where you really are playing with this kind of, the air becomes actual form. Do you feel that, Claire?
Yes, and you're being very articulate. This is the first time I've heard you discuss this sculpture, and you're really helping me to see it in a new way. I think it's a very good description.
Yes,
I see this in your work. I see this in the piece that we just looked at, the branches and the air that you open up between the branches, and perhaps we'll see this again in some of your work.
Yes.
Am I right that this piece was created with the lost wax process, whereas you're doing direct casting in bronze?
Yes, I do the same thing, only instead of just, because this was done, very labor intensive in the sense, all bronze work is labor intensive, but the goal is to make it so that it looks like it just happened, you know, like it was just drawn out. And reading about Hepworth, she did a lot of drawing and painting. With this, I didn't know. And so it was kind of interesting for me to discover that part of her artwork. And the fact that I would assume that she did drawings, but I was kind of surprised by the paintings. She was married to a sculptor first, and then a painter, Ben Nicholson, secondly. And I really love his work. I'm just a fan of his work. And the combination of those two powerhouse, fantastic artists, they just kind of, I think, fed on each other. And there's this abstraction in both of their works is so, I find, very similar. Do you find that, Claire? Do you?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's really interesting because the in the book that I'm reading right now, Nicholson and Hepworth, they actually were married for several years. They had triplets, which I was amazed. They had triplets, two girls and a boy, and she'd had a son from another marriage. And this woman was in that studio with 4 children, and I loved it. I loved it because as an artist myself with children and family, and which is always, and she even said, added to her repertoire. And I had it the same way. I you know, my children were they were spinners off. They brought me things. They talked to me. They actually would come into my workspace and sit down and talk to me about my work. And that was just it's a great joy, you know, and it's a wonderful joy to see a very successful artist handle all of these different portions of her life, you know. But, and the interesting thing is that when Nicholson and Hepworth divorced, which they finally did after many years of marriage, they divorced, and they had received a painting by Mondrian. That's why Mondrian's next.
Okay, let's
go to Mondrian.
I wondered why you chose the Mondrian, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Well, this is so great. They received a Mondrian when he had moved to England during the time that of the war, so he was trying to get away, and he had been there for quite a few years, and before he went to New York. And so they had a gifted, I think there was a trade or something. And so in 1958, when I guess they separated, whatever, they sold the Mondrian painting, Nicholson and Hepworth, and divided the funds. And it's remarkable that it was sold in 58, the painting that they had, which was just red, blue, and yellow. And I tried to find it, but I couldn't find it. But anyhow, this painting here, you know, has the same primary colors, has the same negative space, this beautiful gridding that I find, you know, it's like a drawing and a painting combined. But anyhow, they sold it for $750 a piece, pounds, I should say, 750. Can you imagine? 1950 Mondrian. And Hepworth, she was so great. She took, I thought this was great. She took the monies from that and used it to do her first casting in bronze.
Wonderful story.
What do you think? Isn't that wonderful?
An artist supporting another artist in that sense. Yes.
Yes. Yes.
That's wonderful.
That's why I chose the Mondrian, because I wanted to show their relationship. And both, you know, were pioneers of modernism. You know, you look at, there was a show that the Kimbell did several years ago of the early Mondrian work.
That's right.
With him doing most of the natural landscape pieces. I love that show, and I love the idea of the relationship of how he took the organic natural forms, which I'm very much interested in. And over a period of years, as artists do, developed it into a, a new realm, a new vision. And
this is a wonderful example of that. And I just want to point out to our audience, if they don't know the painting well, I'm sorry we can't be in front of it in person, because this is considered one of the best preserved Mondrians of this period. It's unlined, it retains its original frame so that the painting pushes forward from the frame, just as Mondrian intended. He left the overall painting unvarnished, but he selectively varnished the black grid lines. So there's this subtle variation of matte and gloss. And the other thing you'll appreciate the next time you see it in the galleries is that these are far from being flat areas of color, but they're very much textured by the bristles of the artist's brushstroke. And you can see exactly the path of his brushstroke as he applied the color just up to the edges of the grid line. So it also has, I think, embedded in it some of the delicacy that we find in your work, Linda.
Oh, I agree to that, in the sense that I've always loved his work. I love the transition from the nature movement into this abstraction. I also realized that the negatives that he saw in the trees are also the negatives in the white. But also, to me, sometimes the white becomes so forward. To me, visually, it comes forward. And the black lines go back. It's a back and forth kind of thing. It's a very subtle sculptural quality to the work. Yes. And the fact that he put that border around it, I was so glad to learn that. I didn't know that he had done that, but that he wanted to expand the painting so that basically whoever hung it would not, the wall that they were hanging it on would not interfere with his line work. He wanted
That's right.
Is that right? Am I thinking?
That's right. And framing was very important to him from his early work throughout his career. He put a lot of thought, was very specific about his frame choices.
I'm the same way, in the sense that it was my sculpture and my framed pieces. The frames become exquisite, supremely important to me. I always select whatever material goes around it, because I feel like it is a borderline, but also it can be an extension to the piece of art, and that's what I see with this piece.
Shall we advance then?
Yes.
Here we go.
And here we are with some more line work of mine. This is quite large. It's the figure on the right, and I consider these figures, by the way. The title of this is something that I came with my, it's an evening line seeking its source. This branch was basically found by a friend of mine who said, I found this and it looks like you, Linda. And I loved it because it reminded me of a kind of mother and child. I know this sounds crazy, but that's how I see it. And there is this line quality to it that is, in essence, the thick and the thin, like the Mondrian. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Can we go to the next one and show the detail, maybe? And this is the child.
Beautiful.
I know that's, to some people it would be, but it's like the offshoot of what comes from the single branch goes to another section. And this to me was the mother and child quality. The next one is a grouping of leaves, but let spotted leaves fall as they fall. And this is from a poem by Sylvia Plath. And that's the title from one of her poems. And these leaves are the leaves from the foundry. And this process is similar to what I do in sculpture. In my sculpture, I found it found objects, reconstruct them, reconfigure them. And these are leaves that were directly printed first in what I call ghost printing. And then I go back in, if we could go to the next one, and I draw on top of them and add color and line. And, you know, it's kind of insanity work.
I love this process, the way you're combining the direct printing and the drawing. But am I understanding correctly, by direct printing, you are applying an ink to one side of the leaf and actually pressing it onto the piece of paper,
Yes.
and then going back and reinforcing lines, strengthening lines in graphite.
Yes, yes. And then I actually do, it's called like ghost printing, where it's embossed. You know, I run it through the press. It's actually run through the press. This is like 4 foot by 8 foot. It's rather large grouping of leaves. And there's a beautiful thing occurring right now as we go outside. The leaves are falling and they dance.
Absolutely.
They dance through the air. And that's what I was trying to capture here, was this dance. Back to the Hepworth and her dance and her movement and her lines. You know, there's this wonderful feeling. You know, I was talking to Meredith here at the gallery, and I said, she said, Linda, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm just drawing these leaves, and they're just, you know, the world is crashing and I'm drawing leaves. And she said, I never will forget what she said to me. She said, Linda, sometimes we all just need a few leaves. And I've loved it because I was feeling, you know, I was drowning myself into my processes, basically. You know, I was going into that because everything around me seemed to be falling apart, as so much has happened in the last year and a half. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot on right now. So, and following that is the next leaf piece, and this is a bronze leaf, which has a bit of wording at the bottom, which is from Hecate's speech in Macbeth, and the title is Glory, and I felt like that glory really did fit with the Isabella. And I'm hoping you can say the last name of the next piece, the ceramic piece, if we could go. There's a close-up of it. Again, this was a leaf that I found on the property out at the foundry. And I was looking for a stem part, and I ended up and I just hung it to dry to see what would happen. And it went, oh my God, it just went beautifully into this kind of Baroque. No, I'm going to say Rococo. This is a Rococo leaf. And one of the reasons I left the patina is a kind of golden color.
Yes.
This is more the color of what bronze really looks like, you know, without a patina on it. And basically, I wanted it to have that kind of natural quality, but I also wanted it to be golden without being gold. Does that make any sense? Okay.
I can almost see this as a figure twisting in space. Actually, I'm thinking almost of our Bernini terracotta in clay when I look at it. But I also love thinking about the process you go through in selecting a leaf, finding a leaf that has such qualities that are really speaking to you as an artist, and thinking about how you're going to use that in your sculpture. And I was thinking also that the timing of this Artist's Eye presentation couldn't be better, really, because I think we're at the height of fall. I mean, literally, I'm seeing the leaves falling on the Kimbell lawn, and looking at your work is it's really nice, dovetails with the time of year that we're experiencing. Shall we advance to the next?
Yes, let's go. This is the Isabella. Can you say the name properly for me so I don't mess it up? What is
the name of the artist?
Yes, and the artist and the title of the piece.
So we attribute this piece to Gian Cristoforo Romano, and we don't know for sure, but this figure possibly represents Isabella d'Este.
Yes, and I I don't know, has this been out? And I went to the museum a couple of weeks ago to reacquaint myself with pieces that I had selected, and I saw this piece. Has this been out a lot, or is this just newly placed, or?
This, we've had we did a reinstallation of the collection some months ago. So things have been moved around, but she was missing for a while because she was on loan to the great Leonardo exhibition at the Louvre. So she was out on loan, but otherwise she normally resides in our galleries. It's a very beautiful terracotta, Renaissance terracotta piece. And I'm glad you chose this piece to discuss. And I'm wondering what you're going to focus on. We have
Well,
some details, other details we'll be showing besides this overall view.
right. This, I just found it to be this so beautiful. It just grabbed, I looked at it and I loved the way the fabric was moving, and
I thought you would be addressing the fabric.
and if
Should
we
we
go,
advance?
yeah, let's please do.
Okay, hold on. Oh, it's not moving for me.
Oh,
Okay. Okay, I don't know what happened. Okay, wait, now it's going.
there we go.
Here we go. There we go.
And you can notice the texture of the hair. And of course, the lighting is very important as far as sculpture. And this piece right here, the almost chiaroscuro kind of quality to it is the light and the dark, and it shows the fabric twisting and turning, and her hair is glowing with the ripples. Do you notice the hair? I just found that so beautiful. And then turning to the next slide, it was great to see inside that. I mean, I really got down in there and started looking. And I have worked with clay in the past. And clay is so difficult because it has this drying time before it is fired and all these different things that have to happen but it's so smooth, so delicate, so wonderful. And yet, if you look inside, it is so thick. I don't know how did they do that? I mean, it was just amazingly well crafted. And that for me, not only was it that I was interested in the texture and the quality of the fabric. I mean, it feels like fabric. I mean, that's wonderful. And then the fact that at one time it was painted, and I can't imagine it painted because it's so beautiful without the paint.
I agree. It's hard to imagine it looking more beautiful than it does right now. We have to remind ourselves sometimes that a lot of the art like this that we see in museums is missing its original painted surface.
Yes.
Like the Donatello relief that we see in the background of this slide, another terracotta shallow relief would have originally been painted, and there's very, very little pigment left on that surface. On the Isabella d'Este, I don't think we see any pigment at all, just the beautiful surface of the terracotta.
On the back of it, this really, I was so intrigued by the way he had done the hair. Notice that the hair, yes. And then the way the dress is folding around the form. I mean, it's just magnificent. It's a magnificent piece. And I guess probably what we want to do is go to
back to your work, Hester's letter.
Yeah, Hester's letter. This is, I would say I have been working with fabric and different things ever since, 2005. I started working with different fabrics as well as my nature pieces. Partially that occurred because my young son, who is a costume designer in Austin, Texas, used to bring these things home for me and he'd say, I found this and this looks great. And I was like, okay. But a friend gave me this dress, and it was her grandmother's wedding tea dress, whatever that is. And I printed it similar to what I did with the leaves. and it is quite large. In fact, I don't know if you can see behind me, it's hanging in the gallery here. And if we can go to a detail of it, I can show you the texture of the fabric and the words that were put with it. These words are not poetry, but they come from Nathaniel Hawthorne's Scarlet Letter
Yes.
book. And this is the first sentence. And I find this sentence very dramatic. And
Can you read it for us?
yes, let me, I wrote it out, so in case you wanted to hear it. I remember my reading sometimes. I try my best. It says, a throng of bearded men in sad colored garments, steepled crowned hats, intermixed with women, some wearing hoods and others bareheaded, was assembled in front of a wooden edifice, the door of which was heavily timbered with oak and studded with iron spikes. Yes. I love that sentence. It's just, you know, I remember in high school, everybody reads this in high school, I'm assuming. And I remember thinking as a young student, boy, this is going to be dull. And definitely it was never dull. And it was a piece that I really enjoyed reading. And I'm kind of, when I was working on the sash, and I don't know if we have another slide. I think we do.
We could go, let's see. No, let's go back then to look at the sash.
Yes. The sash is the reason that I decided to take away the graphite and give it some color. As a sculptor, I'm often afraid of color. I like the fact that, you know, this kind of strong, you know, black and white, you know, grays, different things. But when I use color, it is, you know, it becomes a center point or something. And so when I started doing the sash, I realized that that the whole texture of that and everything, it just, the book came to my mind. And so I went and got the book again and reread it and realized that the first sentence had to be on this piece. It gives the piece less of a kind of flatness. It gives it a much more internal reasoning for being. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes. So,
oh,
yes.
I was going to go back to the detail if I could. And I wonder if you could just say a few words about your process in making this piece. It's so light and airy and poetic. What's the actual process that that you're using to
I'm
create?
actually using the full dress. In other words, the dress was given to me by my friend. And when she gave it to me, she said, I know what you do with clothing, and I would like for you to have this. And I said, but I'm going to, if I ink it and print it, I'm going to ruin it. And she said, no. She said, I really think you should use this. And it was a kind of really wrinkled, crazy fabric. But when I started, and I did the same thing that I did with the leaves, I inked the dress many times, many times, until I finally got the surface covered the way I wanted. And then I printed it. And again, we printed it very lightly, so that I would go back in then with pencils. And I used, like, I don't know, 9H to 6B pencils, and I just go back in and draw on top of it. And I add depth, I give it dimension. It's very flat if it's just a print. But when I start drawing on it, I can play with the illusion of depth. And that's why I like the sculpture that we were just talking about, was the actual depth, the way he created fabric. was to me astounding. I really liked that. And I understand how you have to play with the lights and darks. And does that make any sense?
Yes, absolutely. So if we had this piece in front of us, we would see a lot of surface texture from the pressure of your pencil drawing and the way the paper was embossed when you printed the inked fabric. And
right.
wait to see this piece in person sometime. And here's another
This
work.
is one of the earlier pieces that I did this back in, I'm going to look at the date of this, 2011, 2012. And sometimes I give them those 2 dates, similar to Mondrian taking the painting and doing it from New York and then coming back. I'm sorry, doing it in, I guess it was in England.
London, yes.
Starting
in
London.
London.
And then he went back and finished it in New York. Am I right? Right. And I totally understand that, because oftentimes I will start something in one time and then stop working on it and then come back and finish it. So I extend the date of it. But these do take quite a while to do. This is the Alice Chronicles from Alice in Wonderland. And I did 3 of these this again was a piece of fabric that my son gave to me that was constructed. It's a ballerina skirt. And I didn't like the tie on it, so I basically had some ribbons flowing in it to make it more. And I wanted this to be there were 3 where it was kind of standing up straight and then it was moving and tumbling. This is the final image, and it is gathered and it becomes so abstract. I don't think you see skirt, you don't see fabric, you just see this almost brain shape. And
we see a lot of transparency.
Yes.
And, it's to use a word that's often used to describe your work, very poetic.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, and so in essence, that's why this is next, the Modigliani, the head. I just think this is gorgeous. This is so beautiful. It has as you walk around it, at first, when you first look at it, it looks so delicate. And then all of a sudden, you go to the different sides, and you see the chisel marks, the rough, the abstraction of form, and how he's taking, that part right there. I love. It's just a rock. It just looks like a rock.
Let's go back. To remind everybody.
Yes. These are the different viewpoints of it. And then in the front, it's like he's created this sweet, delicate, almost, I don't know how he did it. It's just so delicate and so linear, and yet also, again, there's just enough carving away to catch the light of the nose.
Yes.
I find that. And the eyelids, the way he's done them. And then when you go around to the back again, you see how he's chiseled away and went after it. It was like almost 2 different people doing this piece. There was this. Do you feel that?
He allows us to see. He leaves a window into his process. He allows us to see that he started with a block of stone. And we see these varying degrees of finish. We see his tool marks.
Yes, yes.
We see the piece as it developed in stages, as it emerged from the block of stone.
Right. I have to say, one time I tried to carve a piece of stone, and I just physically said, this is not what I should be doing after I did one piece. And I realized as an artist, you do need to experiment. And sometimes you need to experiment to realize what you should not do, you know. But seeing this and seeing how one side is so delicate and so exquisite and simplified. I love the simplification of the form. I've always liked Modigliani. As a young artist in art school days, I fell in love with his work, and that admiration has never diminished. I have found the more I see of his work, the more excited I get by how abstract he was and how realistic he was at the same time. He was on a bridge, you might say, between this sense of trying to relate it as a human form, but also you were also seeing his I would call birthing of abstraction. So you have these two intermingled ideas happening, and he conveyed it not only in his paintings, but he did it in his stone, which is, I find, magnificent. I did find out that he was neighbors with Brancusi, so this kind of was, that would be a great person to learn from. And it's, you know, it's just sad that he didn't live to have a longer career. He dying at, I think it was 35 or something. He was quite.
I can only imagine what he would have produced if he lived longer.
Yes, yes. But I think he also understood he created so much, similar to Van Gogh, who also did a huge amount of work in such a short amount of time. And sometimes that urgency, and this piece has urgency about it, don't you think?
Yes.
Yes.
I think it's one of the great works of sculpture in the Kimbell collection, and we're so lucky that it was given to us by Gwen Weiner. And this is an incredibly rare piece, as you pointed out. Modigliani did not live very long, and these types of sculptures are very rare, and this is the best of its kind. So I was delighted that you chose it to discuss today.
Yes.
Invite
Yes.
everyone to come and enjoy the piece in the galleries.
Oh, they do. And I like the way it's displayed. It's so important how the sculpture is put into a space. And I love the fact that we are allowed to go around it and see the entire process and to see the entire works, and sculpture should be, you know. And I just found it to be, I don't know, it's remarkable. And then going into the next piece, the Courbet, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly.
That's right.
He basically did this portrait, and I looked up to try to find out when the museum had received it, and I think it was in '84.
Yes, we bought it in the 1980s when Tim
Yes.
Pillsbury was director. That's right.
Yeah. And I remember seeing this many years ago, and it's always been one of my favorites. Similar in the sense that it's a strange painting. I just find it so strange. The turn of the head, the way, you know, it's not like, it's almost, it's an awkward kind of movement, which I find really interesting and completely modern. It's, you know, it's almost snapshot in a way.
That's right.
And when you look at it too, I know he's, you know, he was influenced by Rembrandt. Am I right on that? And there is this sense of this very dark, mysterious world in which this figure lives in. It's sculptural in so many ways, and yet it's also playing with this kind of story that we don't quite know. There's not this, there's an intensity to the figure, the way he looks at us, you know. It's almost like you look at it and you all, every time I find myself looking, and I watched people who look at this portrait at the museum, they turn their head exactly the same way to look. In other words, they want to straighten him up. Does that make sense? I mean, and there's this little twist of the way he's done this has made you, the viewer, you have to participate. There is no way not to participate. And the sense of the lights and the darks, it's absolutely gorgeous. It's one of my favorites.
I want to point out something else very interesting about the material aspect of this painting. It's painted on panel, and
Yes.
Courbet did something really interesting. He had this wooden panel, and one side was very perfectly prepared, sanded down to a very smooth finish, prepared with a very smooth layer of gesso. That would normally be the side of the panel that you would paint on. The other side of the panel was rougher, a little bit like looking at the back of the Modigliani that we just saw, and
Yes.
you could see these parallel chisel marks. It was a rough surface, not meant to be painted on, but that was the side that Courbet chose to paint on. So when you look at the surface of the panel, you see that it's rough. Now, some people have suggested that perhaps he was trying to emulate the aged surface of a Rembrandt painting, where you have maybe craquelure, and where the paint layer has become slightly deformed because of the craquelure. I don't know if that's the case or not, but it's a very interesting aspect of this portrait, which you described so beautifully, is that he painted it on the rough side of the panel.
Yes. I was excited to learn that, because I've always looked at this painting, and it does have a great deal of texture. And so I think that's why I enjoy it so much. It's not just the lighting, and I love the fact that it's black on black on black. You have so many layers of black, and they're so, and the colors are so, the browns and the richness of this painting. But there's also this surface texture of his brush strokes. You can see the brush strokes, and it's as I've said, I think it's a real contemporary piece. It's very modern in my thinking, and I find it, even though the figure has a sense of a different age, the process seems modern.
Yes.
Yes, I mean, I felt like that, so many artists today want a rough surface. They want as much texture as possible. They want the paint to not slide over a slick surface, but become, the paint also becomes the vehicle for making the viewer look across the canvas.
Exactly. A painting like this is really a sculpture in low relief in that sense. Not only because of the rough surface of the panel, but as you point out, because of the texture of the brush strokes and the impasto.
Yes, and that's why I chose it. I think the sculptural quality of it is so important, So.
Is this our last image?
Our last image, yes.
So before we address some questions, I just want to mention to our audience that our next Artist Eye program will be on January 16th. We will be speaking with Matt Clayberg, painter based in New York, and the program will be moderated by George Shackelford, our deputy director, and that promises to be a wonderful program. And now maybe we can address some of the questions, if I can read them. I think we already answered one. One of our, Jerry Davis, wondered, would we be talking about works from the Kimbell collection? And yes, indeed, we did. And here's another question from Jerry Davis. Linda, have you considered using a 3D printer to make a pattern to be lost wax cast?
No.
No.
I have not, but that doesn't mean I won't do that. I have had some offers to do that at one time several years ago, but I was still in the process of working with certain things with the printmaking, incorporated drawings, and the found object sculptures and overlays. And I had not found the way to follow into that process. I will say this, that the clay piece that we just talked about, it's something that I've been thinking about in the sense of doing something in clay, playing with that, not changing my ideas, but playing with the idea of clay and found together and seeing what would happen. I don't know, but I have not played with the idea of 3D.
3D
Although I do know that it can be gorgeous and done well and everything. So maybe later.
Well, thank you for the question, Jerry. Another question, Linda, could you please give us the title of the Hepworth book that you discussed earlier?
Yes, I will. I have it right here. Hold on just a minute. It's called Barbara Hepworth, The Sculptor in the Studio, and the author is Sophie, and I'm going to say Bowness, Bownness, and it is published by Tate, the museum, Tate Publishing House. Okay.
Thank you. Let's see, another comment was, I think when we were looking at one of your leaf sculptures, the one that was you described as a rococo form, it was kind of twisting in space. Emily
Yes.
Reynolds commented, it looks like a witch riding her broom, and maybe appropriate for the time of year.
Yes, yes.
So those are the questions that I see. I don't know if I mentioned before, but I'd like to remind everyone that Linda is represented by Tally Dunn Gallery in Dallas, so you can see her work there. I know you had a very beautiful show there recently. Do you have any other upcoming exhibitions in the works at this point that we need to know about?
Well, I am working on a show that's going to be at the Tyler Art Museum, hopefully next May.
Great.
And also 2021, and possibly a new program at the Nasher. They're doing public installation space, and they've invited me to do something there. And that will be later in the year, around August, I'm hoping. I asked for the last slot, August to 2021. So I'm working on those. And finally, I have been working on clearing the property and putting Harry's work into storage and doing all that. And so along with my artwork, it's a busy life. Love it.
We're thinking of Harry, especially this time of year, because I think it was 3 years ago this month that he passed away. And of course, his contribution to the arts in Texas was enormous. And he leaves such a great legacy, working in bronze and casting. And he was so influential to so many artists. And
He was.
So we're thinking of him especially.
Yes, and he made the magic happen. That's what he did.
Yes.
Yes, and his work is beautifully recording, his ability to keep working on his own work as well as running the foundry and then teaching at TCU for, oh, wow, I don't know, almost 30 years. I mean, it's a real exciting kind of prospect for young artists to realize that you can do a lot, in your time, and you can share.
That's right.
Sharing as an artist is important because it's not just sharing the work, but it's also sharing our ideas and things. It's bringing. I always say that we're bringing something that people can't always find. And the arts are so necessary for people, especially in times like these. So.
They are. And Linda, thank you so much for sharing your insights as an artist today. You help us see and experience works in the Kimbell collection in ways that we haven't before, and you really enliven the experience of this collection. And thank you so much for participating today and sharing your work with us and your ideas, your love of frost, and so on. And you've given us a lot to think about. And I know I will be looking at the Barbara Hepworth with fresh eyes. Thanks to you.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed our conversation. And this is our first Zoom. So, I mean, my first Zoom. And so you've made it wonderfully easy. Thank you very much, Claire.
Thank you so much. And thank you to the audience who joined us today. Thank you for your participation in the Artist's Eye program. And we look forward to being with you next January 16th with Matt Clayberg and George Shackelford. Thank you all and have a wonderful weekend.
Thanks.